Stop coming to visit. You're no longer part of this family. Those words still echo in my mind, dear friend. Have you ever felt the sharp sting of rejection from someone you tried so hard to love? The kind of betrayal that cuts so deep, it changes something fundamental inside you? That's exactly what happened to me, and I'm still processing the mix of hurt and satisfaction that followed. You see, for 8 long years, I bent over backwards trying to be the mother-in-law I thought my son's wife deserved. I bit my tongue when she criticized my cooking, smiled when she made snide remarks about my outdated clothes, and pretended not to notice when she rolled her eyes every time I walked through their door. But that day, that terrible, beautiful day, everything changed. My name is Diane, and I'm 65 years old. I've lived through enough heartbreak and triumph to know that life has a peculiar sense of justice. Sometimes it takes its sweet time, but when it strikes, oh honey, it strikes with precision that would make a surgeon jealous. Let me paint you the picture of who I was dealing with. Brittany, my daughter-in-law, was the kind of woman who posted perfectly curated photos on social media while her real life crumbled behind the scenes. She had this way of making everyone feel small, especially me. Everything about her screamed entitlement. From her designer handbags that she definitely couldn't afford to, the way she spoke to service workers like they were beneath her. But here's what she didn't know about me, what nobody in that family knew. I wasn't just some doddering old woman they could push around. I had secrets, skills, and resources that would have shocked them all. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It all started 8 years ago when my son Michael first brought Brittany home. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. All blonde hair and white teeth, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no. Michael was absolutely smitten, and honestly, I was happy for him. After his divorce 3 years earlier, I'd been worried he might never find love again. The red flags started early, but you know how it is when you want to see the best in people. During that first dinner, she barely touched the pot roast I'd spent all day making, claiming she was watching her carbs. Then she spent the entire evening talking about her job as a graphic designer, like it was the most important work in the world, while somehow making my son's engineering career sound boring by comparison. "Michael's so lucky to have such stability," she'd say with that saccharine smile. "Not everyone can handle the creative pressure I'm under." Us? But Michael was happy, and that's all I cared about. So I kept my mouth shut and hoped things would improve once they settled down together. They got married the following spring in an elaborate ceremony that must have cost more than most people's annual salary. I offered to help with the expenses, but Brittany made it clear that my contribution wasn't needed or wanted. "We want everything to be perfect," she told me with that fake smile plastered on her face. "I'm sure you understand." What I understood was that she didn't want an old woman cramping her style or having any say in her special day. But again, I held my tongue. This was Michael's choice, and I wanted to support him. The real problems started after they had kids. First came Chloe, my beautiful granddaughter, followed 2 years later by little Tyler. You'd think becoming a grandmother would bring us closer together, but if anything, Brittany became even more territorial. Every visit became a minefield. I'd bring toys for the children, and she'd find reasons why they weren't suitable. Too loud, too messy, too educational, not educational enough. There was always something wrong. When I offered to babysit so they could have date nights, she'd make excuses about the kids' routines being too complicated for me to handle. "It's just easier if we stick to our system," she'd say, making me feel like some incompetent stranger rather than their grandmother. The worst part was watching her manipulate Michael. My son, who had always been independent and strong-willed, gradually became this shadow of himself around her. He'd start to defend me or suggest that maybe I could help with something, but one look from Brittany would shut him right down. "Whatever makes you happy, honey," became his standard response to everything she said. I watched my relationship with my grandchildren suffer because of her gatekeeping. Chloe and Tyler would run to hug me when I arrived, but Brittany always found ways to cut our time short. There were always errands to run, naps to take, or activities she'd suddenly remember they needed to do. But the absolute worst moment, the one that still makes my blood boil, happened at Tyler's 5th birthday party 6 months ago. I had spent weeks planning something special for my grandson. I found this vintage wooden train set at an antique shop, the kind they don't make anymore, beautifully crafted and perfect for a little boy who loved anything with wheels. I was so excited to see his face when he opened it. But as soon as Brittany saw the gift, her expression soured. "Oh," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "How rustic. Tyler, be sure to say thank you to Grandma Diane for the old toy." The way she emphasized old made it sound like I'd brought him something from a trash bin. But it got worse. As Tyler started to play with the train, genuinely delighted with how the pieces fit together, Brittany swooped in. "Careful, sweetie. That paint might be lead-based. We should probably put this away until Mommy can check if it's safe." She said it with such concern, such maternal protectiveness, that everyone nodded along. But I saw the smirk she gave me when no one else was looking. She wasn't worried about lead paint. She was humiliating me in front of family and friends, making me look like the irresponsible grandmother who'd endanger her own grandchild. That night, I went home and cried for the first time in years. Not just because of the humiliation, but because I realized I was losing my grandchildren to someone who seemed determined to erase me from their lives. Follow my story to the end and comment the city where you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. But you know what they say about the darkest hour being just before dawn? That birthday party was my darkest hour, and dawn was coming faster than any of us could have imagined. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I had called ahead, as I always did, to ask if I could visit the kids after school. Brittany had agreed, though I could hear the reluctance in her voice even over the phone. When I arrived at their beautiful colonial house in the suburbs, the one with the perfectly manicured lawn and the luxury cars in the driveway, I could feel the tension immediately. Brittany answered the door in her usual outfit, designer yoga pants that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget and a top that screamed expensive casual. "Oh, you're early," she said, though I was exactly on time. "The kids are doing homework." I found Chloe and Tyler at the kitchen table, bent over their books with the serious concentration that 7- and 5-year-olds bring to everything. They looked up when I walked in, their faces lighting up with genuine joy. "Grandma!" Tyler launched himself at me with the pure, uncomplicated love that only children can give. For a few precious minutes, everything felt normal. I helped Chloe with her math problems. She was so smart, just like her father had been at that age, and listened to Tyler tell me about the butterfly they'd found at recess. These were the moments I lived for, the reason I endured all of Brittany's coldness and manipulation. But then Michael came home from work, and I could see immediately that something was wrong. He looked tired, more than tired. He looked defeated. His shoulders sagged as he kissed his wife hello, and when he greeted me, he could barely meet my eyes. "Hey, Mom," he said quietly. "How are you doing?" Before I could answer, Brittany was already orchestrating the evening's activities. Dinner needed to be started, the kids needed baths, there were forms to fill out for school. Every task was presented as urgent and vital, creating this whirlwind of activity that somehow didn't include me. I offered to help with dinner, but Brittany had that covered. I suggested reading to the kids while she cooked, but they apparently had strict bedtime routines that couldn't be disrupted. Every attempt I made to contribute was politely but firmly rejected. Finally, as the kids were being herded upstairs for their baths, Brittany turned to me with that expression I'd come to know so well. The one that looked pleasant on the surface but had ice underneath. "Diane," she said, using that tone people reserve for delivering bad news. "Michael and I have been talking, and we think it might be better if you called before coming over from now on." "I did call," I reminded her. "This morning. You said it was fine." "I know, but things change. We're so busy with work and the kids, and honestly—" She paused, glancing toward the stairs where Michael had disappeared with Tyler. It's just difficult when you're here so often. The children get confused about routines, and it's hard for us to maintain consistency. Each word was carefully chosen, designed to sound reasonable while cutting deep. She was telling me I was disruptive, unwanted, a problem to be managed rather than family to be welcomed. I understand you want to see your grandchildren, she continued. But maybe we could work out a schedule? Something more structured? Like once a month or so? Once a month. For grandchildren, I used to see twice a week. I felt something crack inside my chest, but I maintained my composure. Years of dealing with difficult clients in my professional life had taught me to stay calm under pressure, even when everything inside me was screaming. Of course, I said quietly. Whatever you think is best for the family. But Brittany wasn't finished. Maybe she sensed that I was handling her rejection too well, or maybe she just couldn't resist twisting the knife a little deeper. The thing is, Diane, I think you need to understand that this is our family now. Michael and I, we're the parents. We make the decisions about what's best for our children. And sometimes that means setting boundaries with extended family members who might not understand how we want to raise our kids. Extended family members. Not grandma, not Michael's mother. Extended family members. As if I were some distant relative with no real connection to these children I'd loved since before they were born. I just want what's best for Chloe and Tyler, I managed to say. I know you think you do, Brittany replied. And there it was, the implication that I didn't actually know what was best, that my 40 years of life experience beyond hers counted for nothing. But Michael and I have this handled. We really don't need the extra input. That's when Michael came back downstairs, probably drawn by the tension he could feel even from the second floor. He looked between his wife and his mother, and I could see the conflict playing out across his face. But when Brittany moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his arm in that possessive way she had, I watched my son make his choice. "Mom?" he said, not quite looking at me. "Maybe Brittany's right. Maybe we should try the scheduling thing. It might work better for everyone." Everyone. As if I weren't part of everyone. As if my feelings and my relationship with my grandchildren were secondary considerations in this new family structure where Brittany held all the power. I nodded, gathered my purse, and headed for the door. But Brittany wasn't quite done with me yet. "Oh, and Diane," she called out as I reached for the doorknob. "About Christmas this year, we're thinking of starting our own traditions. Just the four of us, you know? It's important for the kids to have consistency." Christmas. The holiday I'd been hosting for Michael's family since he was born. The tradition that had continued even through his divorce, even through all the changes our family had weathered. She was taking that away too. But even then, even with my heart breaking and my hands shaking as I walked to my car, I maintained my dignity. I didn't shout or cry or make a scene. I simply said, "I understand. Have a lovely evening." It was the following Tuesday when everything truly fell apart. I had been respecting their boundaries, staying away, trying to convince myself that maybe some space would be good for everyone. But I missed my grandchildren terribly, and when I saw a beautiful children's book about trains, Tyler's favorite thing in the world, I couldn't resist buying it. I called first, as instructed. Brittany answered on the third ring, her voice already irritated before she even knew who was calling. "What is it, Diane?" "I found a lovely book for Tyler," I began. "I was wondering if I could drop it by—" "No." The word hit me like a slap. Just no, with no explanation, no attempt at politeness. I just thought, "Diane, I thought I made myself clear last week. We need space. The kids are fine without constant gifts and visits. They need to learn that love doesn't come from things." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. This from a woman who posted photos of her children's elaborate birthday parties and expensive toys on social media, like some kind of parenting competition. "It's just a book," I said quietly. "It's not about the book. It's about boundaries. It's about you understanding that this is our family, not yours." Stop trying to buy the children's affection with presents. Buy their affection. As if the grandmother who had loved these children since before they drew their first breath was some stranger trying to win them over with bribes. Something inside me snapped. Brittany, I am their grandmother. I have every right to— You have the rights we give you, she cut me off. And right now, we're not giving you any. Stop coming over. Stop calling with gift ideas. Stop trying to insert yourself into every aspect of our lives. The line went quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe she was done. But then came the words that would change everything between us forever. Here's the truth, Diane. You're not wanted here anymore. The kids don't need you. Michael doesn't need you. And I certainly don't need you. So stop coming to visit because you're no longer part of this family. The phone went dead in my hands, and I sat there in my quiet kitchen, staring at the children's book about trains that I'd never get to read to my grandson. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly powerless. This woman, this cruel, manipulative woman, had just erased me from my son's life and my grandchildren's lives with a few carefully chosen words. But here's what Brittany didn't know about me, what none of them knew. I hadn't always been just Michael's mother. Before I retired, before I became the gray-haired woman in sensible shoes who brought homemade cookies and knitted scarves, I had been someone else entirely. For 32 years, I was Diane Morrison, senior financial consultant at Morrison & Associates. Yes, the firm was named after me. I had built my career helping families navigate financial crises, negotiate with banks, and restructure debts that seemed impossible to overcome. I had saved family businesses, prevented foreclosures, and turned financial disasters into comeback stories. More than that, I understood money in ways that most people never would. I knew how banks thought, how they operated, what pressure points they had, and how to exploit them. I had connections throughout the financial industry that most people would kill for, and yes, I had been very, very successful at what I did. The house I lived in, the modest ranch home that Brittany had always looked down on, was paid off entirely. The car I drove, the practical sedan she'd made fun of, was bought with cash. I had investment portfolios, retirement funds, and savings accounts that would have made her jaw drop. But I had never flaunted my wealth because I believed in living modestly and helping others quietly. I had always planned to use my resources to help my family when they needed it. College funds for the grandchildren, maybe help with a down payment on a bigger house, emergency funds for medical bills or job losses. That's what family money was for, in my mind, to lift each other up when life got tough. But now, sitting in my kitchen with tears running down my cheeks and fury building in my chest, I realized something that would have terrified Brittany if she'd been capable of understanding it. I was no longer motivated by love and generosity. Now I was motivated by something far more dangerous, the cold, calculating anger of someone who had been pushed too far. I spent the rest of that week in a haze of hurt and rage, replaying every insult, every dismissal, every moment when Brittany had made me feel small and unwanted. But by the weekend, something had shifted. The hurt was still there, but it had crystallized into something harder and more focused. I began to pay attention to things I'd previously ignored. Like the fact that Michael and Brittany's lifestyle never quite made sense mathematically. His engineering salary was good, and her graphic design work brought in decent money, but not enough to support the house they'd bought, the cars they drove, the vacations they took, and the private school they'd just enrolled the kids in. I started doing what I'd done for decades in my professional life, following the money. It wasn't stalking or invasion of privacy. It was simply applying the skills that had made me one of the most successful financial consultants in the state. Property records showed they'd bought their house 3 years ago for $450,000 with a minimal down payment. Their mortgage payments, combined with the loans on their 2 cars, plus credit card minimums, private school tuition, and basic living expenses, would eat up almost everything they brought in each month. They were living paycheck to paycheck, despite their social media presence that suggested unlimited prosperity. But that wasn't the interesting part. The interesting part came when I started looking at their credit history. Information that was surprisingly accessible when you knew where to look and had the professional connections I'd cultivated over 3 decades. They were drowning. Not just struggling, drowning. Credit cards maxed out, personal loans, even a second mortgage they'd taken out last year that they were apparently using to fund their lifestyle. The financial picture that emerged was of a family spending roughly 40% more than they earned, using credit to bridge the gap and hoping something would change before it all collapsed. Something was going to change, all right. Just not in the way they were hoping. I could have predicted what would happen next, even if I hadn't been watching their financial situation so closely. When you're leveraged that heavily, when you're making minimum payments on maximum balances, it only takes one small disruption to bring the whole house of cards tumbling down. The disruption came from an unexpected source. Brittany's largest client decided to take their business in-house rather than continuing to contract with freelance designers. Just like that, about 60% of her income vanished. I knew about it before Michael did, because I'd been discreetly monitoring the business filings of her major clients. When Patterson Marketing Group filed papers for a new in-house design department, I knew Brittany's world was about to come crashing down. But I didn't have to wait long to see the effects. Exactly 2 weeks after my daughter-in-law had told me I was no longer part of the family, she received a letter that would change everything. I knew about the letter because I had contacts at First National Bank, the same bank that held their mortgage and several of their loans. When you've spent 3 decades in financial consulting, you develop relationships with people throughout the industry. People who trust you, who know you're discreet, and who sometimes share information that helps you help your clients. In this case, I wasn't trying to help anyone. I was simply staying informed about the family that had cast me aside, watching from the sidelines as their carefully constructed facade began to crumble. The letter was a formal notice of default. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage payments. Apparently, they'd been juggling which bills to pay each month, hoping to catch up before anyone noticed. But banks always notice, especially when someone owes them $300,000 and has suddenly stopped paying. They had 30 days to bring their account current, not just the missed payments, but also the fees and penalties that had accumulated. The total amount needed to avoid foreclosure was $47,000, due immediately. For most people, coming up with almost $50,000 in 30 days would be impossible. For Michael and Brittany, who were already leveraged to their eyeballs and had just lost their primary source of income, it might as well have been $50 million. I sat in my home office that evening, looking at the information my banking contact had shared, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the cold satisfaction of watching an inevitable outcome unfold exactly as predicted. This was what happened when you spent more than you earned. This was what happened when you chose appearances over substance. This was what happened when you treated people with cruelty and disrespect, never considering that you might need their help someday. But more than that, this was what happened when you made the catastrophic error of alienating someone who had both the resources and the expertise to save you. 3 days after the letter arrived, I could track its delivery through my banking connections. Michael called me for the first time in a month. I let it go to voicemail. Then he called again. And again. When I finally answered on the 4th call, I could hear the desperation in his voice before he even spoke. "Mom?" His voice was shaky, smaller than I'd heard it since he was a child. "Mom, can we talk?" "Of course, honey," I said, my voice warm and motherly, giving no indication that I knew exactly why he was calling. "What's going on?" "We're in trouble, Mom. Big trouble. Brittany lost her biggest client and we got a letter from the bank. About the house. I don't know what to do." The defeat in his voice would have broken my heart just a month earlier. But hearts, once broken by cruelty, don't heal as easily as people think. Sometimes they heal harder, colder, more calculating than they were before. "Oh, Michael," I said with what sounded like genuine concern. "That sounds serious. How much do you owe? It's bad, Mom. Really bad. We need $47,000 in the next 3 weeks, or we lose everything. The house, the kids' school, everything we've built. I let the silence stretch out, giving him time to fully absorb the magnitude of his situation. On the other end of the line, I could hear him breathing heavily, probably fighting back tears. Michael, I said finally, my voice gentle but not quite as warm as it usually was. That's a substantial amount of money. What have you and Brittany discussed in terms of options? We don't have any options, he said, and I could hear the panic rising in his voice. We've already borrowed against everything we own. Our credit cards are maxed out. We tried to get a personal loan, but our credit score has tanked over the past year. The bank won't extend our mortgage. Nobody will lend to us. What about Brittany's family? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Brittany's parents lived comfortably but had made it clear years ago that they expected their daughter to stand on her own 2 feet financially. They don't have that kind of money. Her dad's retired and they're living on Social Security and a small pension. They couldn't help even if they wanted to, which left exactly one person in their lives who might have the resources to save them. The same person Brittany had told was no longer part of the family. The irony was so perfect it was almost poetic. Mom, Michael's voice cracked. I know things have been difficult between you and Brittany lately. I know she said some things that weren't fair, but you're the only person we can turn to. You're the only family we have left. Now I was family again. Funny how quickly that designation had changed when they needed something. Michael, honey, what exactly are you asking me? I'm begging for help. A loan. We'll pay you back, I swear. We'll figure out a payment plan. We'll give you everything we can each month. Just please, please don't let us lose our home. Don't let your grandchildren become homeless because of our mistakes. There it was, the emotional manipulation that Brittany had taught him so well. Appeal to my love for the grandchildren, make me feel responsible for their welfare, make it seem like refusing would be tantamount to child abuse. But here's what Michael didn't understand. I had spent 3 decades helping people in financial crisis, and I could smell manipulation from a mile away. More importantly, I knew exactly how much power I held in this situation, and I intended to use every bit of it. Where's Brittany? I asked. Shouldn't she be part of this conversation? The pause told me everything I needed to know. She's having a hard time with this. She doesn't want to ask you for help. She's embarrassed about the situation. Embarrassed. Not sorry for the way she'd treated me. Not regretful about telling me I was no longer family. Embarrassed. As if their financial crisis was somehow more humiliating than the months of cruelty and disrespect I'd endured. I see, I said quietly. So she's comfortable with you asking for my help, but she's not comfortable enough to ask herself? Mom, please, she's struggling with this. It's hard for her to admit we need help. Michael, let me make sure I understand the situation correctly. 3 weeks ago, your wife told me that I was no longer part of your family. She told me to stop visiting my grandchildren. She made it clear that my presence in your lives was unwelcome and disruptive. Is that accurate? She was stressed. She didn't mean... Did she say those things or didn't she? Another long pause. Yes, she did. And now you're calling me because you need $47,000 to save your home? Yes. And where is your wife during this conversation? She's upstairs, with the kids. I could picture it perfectly. Brittany pacing around their bedroom, too proud to face the consequences of her own cruelty, but desperate enough to send her husband to grovel on her behalf. It was cowardice masquerading as dignity, and it told me everything I needed to know about who I was really dealing with. Michael, I want you to go get Brittany and put me on speakerphone. If she wants my help, she can ask for it herself. Mom, I don't think that's a good idea right now. She's really emotional about this whole situation. Then I guess you'll have to find another solution, I said calmly. Because I'm not writing a check based on a secondhand request from someone who told me I'm not family anymore. The power had shifted, and we both knew it. For months, I had been the supplicant in this relationship, begging for scraps of time with my grandchildren, accepting insults and humiliation just to maintain some connection to my son's family. But now the tables had turned completely. Now they needed me more than I needed them. Please, Mom, just this once. I promise things will be different afterward. Brittany realizes she made mistakes. What kind of mistakes? She knows she wasn't always fair to you. She knows she said things she shouldn't have said. Such as? I was going to make him say it. Every cruel word, every dismissive comment, every moment of humiliation. I was going to make him acknowledge exactly what his wife had put me through before I even considered helping them. She told you not to visit. She said you weren't part of the family anymore. She was harsh. Harsh. I let the word hang in the air like a bad smell. Is that what we're calling it? Mom, what do you want me to say, that she was wrong? Yes, she was wrong. That she hurt your feelings? Yes, she did. But we're desperate here. Our children could lose their home. Our children. Not his children, or even their children. Our children. Including me and the family again when it was convenient, when they needed something from the grandmother they'd discarded like an old piece of furniture. But I wasn't quite ready to show my hand yet. There was one more thing I wanted to understand. Michael, tell me something. In all the years I've been in your life, all the years I've been your mother, have I ever been anything but generous and supportive? Of course not. You've been wonderful. And yet your wife convinced you that I was somehow disruptive and unwelcome in your home. Why do you think that was? He was quiet for so long, I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know, Mom. I think she felt threatened by you somehow. Like you had too much influence with the kids or with me. She wanted to be the only important woman in our lives. There it was. The truth, finally spoken aloud. Brittany hadn't been protecting her family from an interfering mother-in-law. She had been eliminating competition for control. She had seen my close relationship with my son and grandchildren as a threat to her dominance, and she had systematically worked to destroy it. But she had made one crucial miscalculation. She had assumed I was powerless to fight back. Michael, I said, my voice taking on the tone I used to use with clients who were about to receive news they didn't want to hear. I want you to bring Brittany to the phone. Right now. If she wants my help, she's going to ask for it herself, and she's going to apologize for every cruel thing she said to me. She's going to acknowledge that she was wrong, and she's going to promise that things will change if I decide to help you. I don't think she'll do that, Mom. Then I guess you'd better start looking for another solution, I said calmly. Because those are my terms. And you? What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? The next 24 hours were the longest in Michael's life, I'm sure. I didn't answer when he called back that night, or the next morning, or the next afternoon. I let him stew in the consequences of his wife's cruelty. Let him fully understand the position they'd put themselves in. When he finally got Brittany on the phone with me the following evening, I could hear the desperation in both their voices. Diane? Brittany's voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Smaller, uncertain, stripped of the arrogant confidence that had defined all our previous interactions. Michael told me you want to talk to me. That's right, Brittany. I understand you have something you'd like to ask me. The silence stretched out so long I wondered if she'd hung up. Finally she spoke, her voice barely audible. We need help, financial help, with the house. I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Could you speak up? I was going to make her say it clearly, loudly, with no ambiguity about what was happening. She was going to have to swallow every bit of her pride and ask the woman she'd banished from the family to save her from losing everything. We need help, she said louder, anger creeping into her voice despite her vulnerability. We need money to save our house. How much money? $47,000. That's quite a lot of money, Brittany. Why do you think I would want to help you? Another long pause. I could practically hear her jaw clenching through the phone. Because we're family. The audacity was breathtaking. After explicitly telling me I was no longer part of their family, she was now trying to use family loyalty to manipulate me into saving them. Are we family, Brittany? Because I distinctly remember you telling me that I was no longer part of your family. You told me to stop visiting, remember? I was wrong about that. Wrong how? I was wrong to say those things. She was giving me the minimum, trying to apologize without actually apologizing, trying to admit fault without taking responsibility. But I hadn't spent 30 years negotiating with banks and creditors to be satisfied with half measures. What specifically were you wrong about? I was wrong to tell you not to visit. And I was wrong to say you weren't part of the family. And? The pause was so long I thought she might have actually hung up this time. And I was wrong to treat you badly. How did you treat me badly, Brittany? I was going to make her catalog every cruelty, every insult, every moment of humiliation. Not because I was sadistic, but because people who never acknowledge their mistakes never learn from them. I was rude to you. I made you feel unwelcome. Can you be more specific? Diane, please, Michael's voice cut in. She's trying to apologize. Can't we just— Michael, I'm not talking to you right now. I'm talking to your wife. Brittany, I asked you to be specific. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with tears that might have been genuine or might have been calculated. I'd stopped caring which. I criticized your gifts to the children. I made comments about your clothes and your house. I limited your time with Chloe and Tyler. I made you feel like you weren't wanted. It was a partial list at best, but it was a start. And why did you do those things? I don't know. I was wrong. That's not an answer. Why did you treat me that way? The truth, when it finally came, was quieter than I'd expected. I felt like you were trying to take over. Like the kids loved you more than me. Like Michael listened to you more than he listened to me. I felt threatened. There it was. The honest admission I'd been waiting for. She hadn't been protecting her family from an interfering mother-in-law. She'd been protecting her ego from competition she'd imagined. And now you want my help? Yes. $47,000. Yes. To save the house that you were so proud of, the house that you never invited me to help decorate or celebrate in. She was crying now. I could hear it in her voice. Yes. I let the silence build. Let them both fully absorb the reversal of power, the complete shift in our relationship. The woman who had made me beg for scraps of time with my grandchildren was now begging me for the money that would save her from homelessness. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice taking on the calm authority I'd perfected over 3 decades of financial consulting. I'm going to give you the money you need. I heard Michael's sharp intake of breath, Brittany's sob of relief. But, I continued, it comes with conditions, non-negotiable conditions. What conditions? Michael asked. First, this is a loan, not a gift. You'll sign a promissory note with a reasonable interest rate and a payment schedule you can actually meet. I'm not going to set you up to fail, but I'm also not going to pretend this is charity. That's fair, Michael said quickly. Second, I want unlimited access to my grandchildren. No more calling ahead, no more scheduling visits like I'm a stranger. I'm their grandmother, and I'll see them when I want to see them. Of course, Brittany whispered. Third, both of you are going to attend financial counseling. You're going to learn how to budget, how to live within your means, and how to avoid ever getting into this situation again. We'll do whatever you want, Michael said. And fourth, I said, saving the most important condition for last, Brittany is going to apologize to me in front of the children. She's going to explain that Grandma was never the problem, that she made mistakes in how she treated me, and that things are going to be different from now on. I can do that. Brittany said quietly. Good. Because if any of these conditions are broken, if I sense even a hint of the old disrespect or manipulation, the loan becomes due immediately, in full, and I will have no problem foreclosing on people who abuse my generosity a second time. The next day, I walked into their house, the same house I'd been banned from just weeks earlier, carrying a certified check for $47,000. But more than that, I was carrying the satisfaction of watching someone learn one of life's hardest lessons, that the people you mistreat have long memories, and sometimes they have the power to save you from your own mistakes. Brittany couldn't look me in the eye as she signed the loan documents. Her hands shook as she wrote her name, and when she whispered thank you, it sounded like the hardest thing she'd ever had to say. But watching her explain to Chloe and Tyler that she had been wrong about Grandma, that she was sorry for keeping us apart, and that I would always be welcome in their home, that was worth every moment of humiliation she'd put me through. Because here's what I learned about revenge, dear friend. The sweetest kind isn't about destruction. It's about correction. It's about teaching people that their actions have consequences, that cruelty comes with a price, and that sometimes the people they've wronged are the only ones who can save them from themselves. Brittany never became warm toward me, but she never again treated me with open disrespect. She learned to live with the knowledge that I had saved her family when no one else could or would, and that her children knew exactly who had come through when it mattered most. And me? I got my grandchildren back, plus the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, justice comes to those who wait for the right moment to serve it. And you? What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment down below and subscribe to the channel to receive more stories like this. Thank you for following me to the end.